Olympiad 2020, the world's largest and most competitive board gaming tournament. With me is Jordi Legendario Alexander, one of the contenders this year for the title of the Pentamind World Champion, the world's strongest board gamer. How are you doing today, Jordi?
Great, good to be with you, Chris.
I'm super excited that we get this opportunity to open this new segment, Stories of the MSO, where we get to pick the brains of some of the more interesting people here at the MSO. You're currently in second place in the Pentamind World Championship. We have only a couple of weeks left until the end of the Pentamind Championship. What do you reckon your chances are of taking out the crown?
I think it's going to come down to some of the Euro games and the last couple of backgammon tournaments where there's a high degree of chance, and if you kind of get lucky and get like a top 2 finish in some of these, it would be pretty big. I think Anchorage has a very solid lead, but things can happen. There's a lot of events left.
He could die. No, we don't wish the other competitors. For those of you who don't know, it's fantastic that you mentioned Ankush. Ankush being a 3-time previous winner of the Pentamind World Championship, so recognized as one of the best in the world, and he's won the past 2 years running. Currently, Ankush is ranking number 1 in the Pentamind standings with Jordi just behind him in 2. And it's actually fantastic that you mentioned Ankush, because I heard we were speaking a little bit earlier about how much the two of you have been training together and thinking about board games. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, he's a great guy. We have a lot of common interests. We both love game theory, and we love a lot of the same games. So I think we have quite a lot of overlap in terms of the games that we enjoy playing. We have a different style. We have different strengths. It's totally different. But for training, it's amazing. We can kind of like tackle new games that we don't know very well together, or we'll kind of give each other tips in games that we happen to be stronger than the other person is. So it's a very beneficial relationship. But then when the lights go on and it's time to compete, he's a different animal. He just becomes a beast.
Can I really, something piqued my interest just then. You mentioned different styles towards board gaming. Could you tell us a little bit about how the two of you differ? The number 1 and potentially the number 2 in the world. How do you define your own style? How do you define Ankush's style?
I think I have my strength is just in game theory. Any game that has the ability to solve it in a sort of game theoretical optimal way. I come from the poker world. I've played poker seriously for a very, very long time. So I'm very used to kind of immediately tackling a game with like a GTO mentality, it's called in poker, which is basically understanding kind of what the optimal play is. It doesn't mean I play the optimal way. I like to deviate and take advantage of weaker opponents. So you can maximize your strength, not by playing optimally, but understanding the framework is something that I'm quite good at. I would say Anchorage is he's probably stronger at sort of like tactics, being like analytically deep. Although strangely enough, he seems to not like the abstract games as much as some of the other competitors against us, like Andres and Maciej, who are kind of more like abstract masters. I would say me and Anchorage are more well-rounded. We can play those games very well, but we kind of like all sorts of games.
That's extraordinary insight. So my understanding of game theory optimal, right? By the way, which you did a fantastic job of explaining, and your deviations. If you notice someone in poker, for example, if you notice someone in poker has a propensity to bluff, that to put more money into to put large bets in, that there is a certain way that you can change your game style, your play style, to take advantage of that. Is that what you meant by the deviations in play?
Yeah, that's definitely one example, is adapting to your opponent's specific style. But another one is just if you're playing against somebody who is slightly weaker, you don't necessarily need to play optimally against them. You can kind of like do things that normally they would be able to take advantage of. But if you don't expect them to be able to take advantage of it, then you don't have to worry about it as much. So it's a key change that if you don't make it, then you still have an edge. Obviously, like optimal means optimal. You can never do better than optimal in terms of two like world-class competitors, like two computers. But I do like to think about it in terms of like how would a computer solve this game, and try to like quickly converge to that style.
Very cool. And that actually leads me really nicely to my next question, which is how do you think the way that you've studied board games, because we saw your excellent, exciting match, your finish in Catan Cities and Knights. We talked a little bit about this then. How have you and you're playing at a ridiculously high level actually at the moment with some fantastic results across a whole bunch of different board games. How would you say that your board gaming skills, that your way of thinking about strategy and tactics and learning, really, it's about learning. How do you think they've impacted your life outside of the board gaming table?
Yeah, I mean, the whole reason I decided to take this event a bit more seriously is because it's the same thing when you challenge yourself, you push yourself outside your boundaries, you learn a lot about yourself, you kind of like see what your strengths and weaknesses are, and they might surprise you. You might think that you're good at certain things and not good at other things, and it might be completely different. And that's definitely been the case for me. It's been a massive challenge for me just being able to compete in all these new games I've never learned before and have to like quickly adapt. And some things I've done a lot better than I thought, and some things a lot worse than I thought. I definitely learned a lot about myself. For example, I can say that I've been surprised how quickly I can learn a new game. I think with 10 hours, I can become like a master level in quite a few of the games.
Wow.
Some are more complex. So like some, it's my favorite game right now. It's one called Twilight Struggle, which it's been added for the first time this year. It's in the last weekend. That game, it took me months of like hard work to really kind of master that game and become one of the top players in that one. It's a super fun game, by the way, if you haven't ever played it. But some of the sort of simpler games, Takenoko is one where I spent maybe 5 or 6 hours on it, and I think I can see that I'm extremely strong against the field on that one.
Correct my ignorance. Is Takenoko the one where you feed a panda bamboo and you grow?
Yes.
That's the one.
Somehow I just took a liking to that game immediately.
Sometimes the flavor of board games is the thing that really brings us in. But for masters like yourself, it's really about really a deep understanding of the mechanics behind it and how the specific rule set allows for exploitation and gameplay, which is fascinating to me. I actually I've got 2 questions left. So second last question today. You spoke a little bit about how you learn board games, and certainly one of the draws of the Mind Sports Olympiad year after year is the fact that we are the world's largest board gaming tournament. This year, across the month of August, we have something like 90 different board games, 15 world championships, a whole array of different games. So I wanted to ask you a little bit more about how do you take a new game and decide, I'm going to get good at this? And how do you, from that point, how do you break it down? What's your general process like of understanding the rule set of getting really good really quickly?
Yeah, I think for the top players, you basically like rely on games that you've studied before in the past. So you have to use whatever you have. And for a lot of us, I think all the kind of top players played chess when they were young. So that's something that not many of us still kind of take it very seriously. I think Massier is probably the strongest one of all the competitors in chess, followed by Ankush. But all of us who've played chess can use those kind of skills. For me, I've spent a lot of time. My advantage over Ankush is probably that I've played Go. So when it came to games like Battle Sheep, the reason I didn't perform as well as I could have, but I was kind of the highest ranked, at least in that game. A lot of Go skills came into play, and I think that's why Massier was also maybe like the second strongest in that game, because he plays a lot of Go. So using kind of like building blocks from classic fundamental games that we've happened to spend a lot of time on, Go is massive in Battle Sheep. You kind of like understand this concept of, 2 spots being equivalent. You don't have to play there, because if your opponent does, then you can play. So you take the initiative. A lot of these kind of things come into play. If Battle Sheep had like a slightly bigger board and it wasn't sort of like only 4 tiles, if 2 players played on the whole board, I think it would come into play even more. It would be like an amazing game. Just being able to kind of spread around and kind of look at all the diagonals. So kind of having a lot of building blocks, then using them. Like for me, I use a lot of poker in Takenoko, which might surprise you because you might think poker has nothing to do with Takenoko. It's like completely different games. But for me, using the ability to hide what your cards are and trying to read what the opponent's cards are by their actions just comes in massively. So that's like a very good example.
Very cool, super cool. It's actually really interesting to me that you use the words building blocks. So I'm a teacher by trade, or one of my trades, and Piaget, the educational psychologist, talks a lot about chunking, which is the way that we learn by associating it with previously learnt chunks. And we go, well, we kind of open up a subdirectory and go, oh, that looks like this. Let's put it there. Which means that when you learn something which you don't have an association with, for example, if Jordi, we took you and put you in a Broadway dance class where you have very little chunks beforehand, it would take you a lot longer to build those chunks from other little tenuous strands here and there. Super interesting stuff, how you talk about learning. And I love that about the way that you think about your board gaming. Fantastic. I've only got one last question for you, Jordi, which is, right now, you're in the running and you've kind of come out of the woodwork. This is the first year that you've competed at the MSO at a really serious level. And I hope the first of many years to come. And you've come out with a bang. You're kind of shaking up the field a little bit, making some of these other pros, giving them a run for their money. What piece of advice would you have for a young up and coming gamer who might have the same star-filled eyes as you do, and have this feeling, this arrogant feeling deep inside their heart that I too want to fight and beat up the world's best? What would you say to those kinds of people?
I mean, obviously, like in anything else, it takes a lot of time and a lot of work, but it's such a fun thing to do. So obviously, finding games that you find are fun makes it a lot easier to put the work in. And I like one of Ankush's rules that he told me early on, which is he'll only tackle a game if he thinks it's fun. So I think that's like a fundamental basis, really kind of seeing what draws you early on, and then you can go deeper. It's usually a good sign if you kind of like immediately take a liking to a game. Although I've had games where, like Carcassonne was one where I started playing it and I just didn't like the artwork. I know it's such a picky thing, but I couldn't tell, like, does this connect? Like, is the farmer going through, like, I just hated it. I hated it. But
shout out to the creators of Carcassonne, by the way. Well, thank you very much for our sponsors. Sponsored largely, no, I'm joking entirely. Sorry, Jordi, off you go.
I mean, I put the work in and I think I'm a decent player at it. But for me, I like, simple visual things. So like King Domino was one where it might be built for babies. You have these like little kind of cartoonish almost dominoes, but I just took a liking to it because it's just aesthetically pleasing to me. So if you find things that drive you, kind of make it more pleasant for you, then it makes putting the work in a lot better. And then of course, looking at how the top players play, there's certain games, like if they're on Board Game Arena, it's so easy to just look at, how the top ranked players are doing what they're doing. Certain games, if they're not on there, I've tried in the last couple of days to like learn Zerts, and there's literally nothing to be found. You just have to figure out all these tactics. It's a fascinating game, very interesting abstract game, but you don't have that advantage I don't think that I could improve as fast given I don't have like something to study.
Resources, absolutely. Something which is a recurring theme for all of these newer games, these newer, particularly modern abstract games that are being added to the MSO tournament year after year, and something which is certainly required of you if you wish to take out the crown of the world's most well-rounded, the world's strongest board gamer. I've had a delightful time chatting with you, Jordi. I'm just gonna have we're gonna if Jordi's words have inspired in you this desire to either fight him or people like him at the MSO, then please join in. Feel free to join in to the fun this year. We are competing all the way through the month of August, and if you're wanting to register, registration is free this year for the very first time in our competition's history. All the games are played online, and there are hundreds of pounds of prize money up for grabs. But if you're like Jordi or you're like myself, those pounds don't mean anything near as much as the pride that you take in looking across your internet stream or board game in many years into the eyes of your competitors who are as well considered as our good friend Jordi Alexander, Mr. Legendario is, and crushing them within an inch of their life while they struggle futilely. If that is you, we look forward to welcoming you next year, either in our competition or better yet, online through all of our commentary streams on YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook. From all of us here, Jordi, I want to say thank you very much for joining us for this chat. I've learned a lot about board gaming from you today, and I hope very much to be able to commentate one of your appearances, one of your playthrough tournaments in the next couple of weeks, and hopefully see you really making a fight of it with Ankush for that final crown at Pentamind World Championship, which is starting to end up, which is looking like a real race this year.
Oh, thanks, Chris. It's been great. Thank you.
From all of us here at the MSO, catch you around, and I hope to see you at the game tables. Bye for now. Bye.